Hello, everyone. Um, how are you all? I think I'm live. I hope you can hear me. It'd be great if somebody could tell me. So I'm having the latest round of technical issues, which today means that my webcam, my normal webcam, isn't working. I don't understand why. So I've had to switch my desk around a bit, which means that much as I had a nice new view where you could see my books, you can sort of see my books, but you can also see some Arsenal shirts as well. And I'm a bit blurrier because I'm now on my laptop's webcam and this isn't so great. Anyway, loud and clear. Thank you very much, everyone. Who knows why the camera's not working? Not me. Anyway, right, I'm going to try and share my slides because who wants to look at my face? Anyway. Okie dokie. Great. I'm also on a smaller screen because I'm now on the laptop and not on the usual setup, which you can't see, which is over here, which probably means I'm going to be squinting into my screen a bit. Anyway, complaints out of the way, monthly complaints out of the way. How are you all? I hope you're all well. Thanks for coming as always. Hello, Bjorn. Sorry that you won't be able to be here, but you do have, as you say, in real life lectures to go to these days. I hope you're enjoying those, and yeah, I hope you enjoy this when you can catch up. Omid says, just want to send a thank you for the amazing work you're doing. Thank you so much. Hello, Zoe. Hi, Linda. Hello, Amy. Almost forgot about this new time. Yeah, sorry, folks. With this month and next month being slightly changed time-wise again. Yeah, I'm terribly sorry. That makes it 4 in a row. I've got too much on at the moment, which I suppose is good, in some ways, but not in all ways. I've got too much on at the moment, quite honestly. Anyway, hello, Helen. Hello, Joyce. Hi, Arthur. Nice to see you again. It's been at least 4 or 5 days, isn't it? Hi, Andrew. Hello, Lucas. Hi, Rosemary. Hello. Nice to relax after the very thorough Missing Cities tour. Went very well. Yeah, I'm glad you think that. Hello, Neil as well. Yeah, well, what a great trip we had. And is this the first talk? Yeah, gosh, it is the first talk. I've got so much on at the moment. It feels like Egypt, and the Missing Cities trip was ages ago, and it was 2 weeks or something that we got back. Anyway, hello, Phil. Hello, Lindy. 3 a.m. in Australia. Being awake for your live stream in the silver lining. I'm struggling with jet lag. Okay. Dear, oh dear. Let's hope perhaps the talk, where am I going with this, helps you to get some sleep. Where am I going? Hi, Joe. Hi, Amelia. Hello, and hi, Renee. Thank you all for coming. Thanks as ever for your support. Great to have you here. So I think I better get on. Lots to get through as usual. So this month we're looking at what I'm promising is Mentuhotep II and the rise of Thebes. So this is the sort of culmination of this talk is going to be a favorite monument of mine, from which the relief on the screen comes. I don't want to give all of my secrets away, but I mean, it's not a secret, is it? That this comes from the Temple of Mentuhotep II at el-Bahri, which is a monument that's long been a kind of a favorite of mine. I've looked down into it and across the landscape at it. I've never been into it. It's not open to the public. It requires a special permit, but I am delighted to say that, all being well, I'll be going with a group in February. We have a special permit for this. It's long been something that's fascinated me. I suppose going back to the time I worked in the Asasif area, which is just in front of the Deir temples, of course. I'm sure you've heard me say before that I was working with the Italian archaeological mission in Theban tomb number 37, the tomb of Hawa. And actually, the tomb of Hawa cut across and sort of into the causeway of this temple. Most of those Asasif tombs are lined up along the causeway of Hatshepsut, along her temple, which was the processional route for the beautiful festival of the Valley. You might remember. I'm sure I will have mentioned that before. So the idea was that all of these 25th and 26th dynasty officials built their tombs along that causeway, so that everybody going along in procession once a year towards the temple with the statue of Amun somewhere at the front of the procession, the statue having come from Karnak. All these people would have gone past these tombs and imagined how wonderful the tomb owners must have been. But the causeways of the two other temples that are there, Temple of Mentuhotep, there's also the smallest of the three is the Temple of Thutmose III. They all have causeways stretching down to the river. And in fact, the causeway of Mentuhotep it runs sort of right the way through that cemetery, and so, as I say, is cut into it. And a bit of it appeared during our excavations in TT 37. And we used to take our breakfast looking out across the landscape towards the temples. And for a kind of reflective type like me, it takes a long time to think about things, and thoughts tend to have a long sort of percolation in my mind. It was brilliant to be able to sit looking at the landscape with my breakfast, just pondering. And I guess it was then I first started to think, hello, this is interesting. Everybody thinks about the Temple of Hatshepsut. It's famous. It's one of the most visited monuments in the valley. But, it wasn't the first one that was there. And I'm not even sure that it was the most spectacular. So the Temple of Mentuhotep has always fascinated me. And I thought it was about time we gave it the lecture treatment. So we will get to the temple eventually. But actually, I want this also to be about this sort of build-up to that, as usual. So here we go. First intermediate period. And again, I don't want to sort of spoil the surprise here, but Mentuhotep II, really is the end of the first intermediate period. Kind of brings it to a close. So the first intermediate period. Forgive me, you'll know this chart by now very well. This we are going to be in the period of the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th dynasties. So that's the period of the first intermediate period, from the end of the Old Kingdom onwards down to the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. And as I say, Mentuhotep's reign marks the transition from our first intermediate period into the Middle Kingdom. So we are at very, very approximately 2000 BC, if you like, if you want to think in absolute years BC. As always with these things, we Egyptologists don't really like using absolute dates, because we can't be absolutely sure in absolute date terms when things happen, and we're still arguing here and there about precise reign lengths and that kind of thing. But for argument's sake, the events that we're talking about today take place approximately 4,000 years ago. I'm afraid, folks, you'll be getting tired of this by now. We're going to talk about Manetho. I always like to talk about Manetho. He's the starting point for our history, and this is, after all, a talk not only about archaeology and archaeological sites, but it's a talk about history too. So we are going to have a quick look at Manetho. So this is one of these tables that I've put together that shows the far left-hand column, which is actually rather vainly entitled Naunton Lost Tombs. What I did when I was putting this together was I used the king list, which is in the back of my own book, which is not my king list. It's it comes from the Penguin Atlas of Ancient Egypt, I think, which was written by Bill Manley. You've got to get your king list from somewhere. But anyway, so I basically just copied and pasted the king's list from the back of my own book. So these are the names that we know the kings of the 6th dynasty by best. Teti Usakar-Ra, Pepi I, Nemti Emsaf, Pepi II, and there's a Necherkar-Ra Siptar, who may well be the Nitocris of Manetho. So we equate those kings with Autothes and Pius, Methsuphis and Peops, and Mentuhotep, another Mentuhotep, and then finally Nitocris. Those are the names in Manetho. The other two columns here, and it's worth explaining this at this point because we're going to see lots of tables like these over the next few slides. I've also added in the names where they survive in two of the main king lists. You might remember I've talked a bit about king lists in the past. So while Manetho was writing in the early Ptolemaic, giving us his long list of kings from the first down to the 30th dynasty, the dynasties being his groupings. The Egyptians did have king lists of their own. We don't have very many of them, and the ones that we do mostly come from the period of the New Kingdom, particularly the 19th dynasty. Two of the best are the Karnak king list, which is in fact has been removed from Karnak, is now in the Louvre, but there's now a replica on site. It's in the area of the Middle Kingdom court and the festival temple of Tuthmosis III. If you're next visiting and you want to see it, you need to go out towards the festival temple. It's over in the right-hand corner of the Middle Kingdom court. The other list is the list, or in this case, it's the Seti Temple Abydos list. According to the label, it's the Seti Temple list, but the Ramesses temple list from Abydos, which is now in the British Museum, is more or less identical to the Seti list. So as you can see here, in the case of the Karnak list, we don't have too many 6th dynasty names. The thing about the Karnak list is it's the order of the kings is a little bit eccentric. It's a bit difficult to understand exactly how they chose the order of the kings, and it's a bit patchier than the Abydos list. But as you can see, the Abydos list is very good here and gives us the names Teti Usakar-Ra, Meri-Ra, Meren-Ra, Neferkar-Ra, and Meren-Ra, which line up quite nicely with, of course, with the names in our currently accepted list. So this is the 6th dynasty. This is the very end, of the Old Kingdom, the last builders of pyramids before we get a collapse in central administration and a decline in monumental building. Well, a rapid decline, rapid and comprehensive decline as far as our evidence is concerned, in that we have virtually no substantial monuments for the first intermediate period, and that includes royal tombs. So it could, of course, be that these just haven't survived, but it seems likely that less resource was invested in construction of such things as temples, but also even royal tombs. So according to Manetho, something else that's important here is that Manetho tells us the 6th dynasty consisted of 6 kings of Memphis. Memphis was the capital city, according to Manetho, of the 4th and 6th dynasties. He says the 5th went elsewhere, but actually we think probably that Memphis was the capital throughout. That appears still to be the case as far as Manetho is concerned for the 7th dynasty, which consisted, he says, of 70 kings of Memphis who reigned for 70 days, which isn't really very helpful to us. He doesn't give us any names at all. And we are almost completely in the dark when it comes to the 7th dynasty. We assume, on the basis of any evidence to the contrary, and also the fact that the capital city still seems to have been at Memphis, that probably this was a continuation of the previous 6th dynasty line. You'll have heard me say many times before, I'm sure, that we don't exactly know why Manetho chose to see there being some kind of change that brought about the shift from one dynasty to the next. And this is one of those occasions when it's a bit mysterious. But perhaps the collapse in central administration and the passing from a great age of central administration and pyramid building to something different is what brought about this change. So we don't know anything really about the 7th dynasty. We know a little bit more about the 8th. He tells us that there were 27 kings of Memphis who reigned for 146 years. That sounds a little bit more plausible. Incidentally, this reference to there being a very high number of kings who reigned for a very short period of time is suggestive of some turbulence. It could, of course, be that Manetho just just didn't know, or his sources were just so badly flawed that the explanation for what was going on at this period is, more or less nonsense. But it does suggest that there was some turbulence, at least, if not chaos. For the 8th, we know a little bit more, and as you'll see here, there are a number of names on the Abydos lists of kings who are attributed to the 8th dynasty. They clearly need to be fitted in at some point in between the known kings from previous periods, the 6th dynasty, and known kings' names from later on. But we can't be absolutely certain where they go, but the convention is that these are 8th dynasty Memphite kings. You will perhaps remember from earlier talks of mine that along with the Karnak and the Abydos lists and Manetho's lists, one of the most useful sources for the names of kings and the sequence in which they reigned is the so-called Turin Canon, which is essentially this very fragmentary papyrus, now in Turin, acquired by Bernardino Drovetti, the French consul, in 1824, apparently put away into a box or something like that and completely forgotten about for 20 years. It appears to have been in much better condition when he initially acquired it. And so probably the fact that it was forgotten sadly is responsible for its current condition. It's only 50% complete, and yet it is still enormously useful because it preserves lots of names that are missing from elsewhere. And even though there are large sections that are missing, as you can see here, we can tell how many lines are missing, and because generally speaking each line represents the name of a king and a little bit of information such as the number of years they reigned, that kind of tells us how many blanks there are. So based on what we've got in the Turin Canon and what supplementary evidence we might have from elsewhere, the other lists and also archaeological information, the Turin Canon is enormously useful. This and I'm struggling to see this slightly on my my little screen here, and imagine you might be as well. But you can perhaps get the sense this is a drawing, what I stole from Wikimedia Commons, made very helpful drawing made by somebody, B. Jegorovich. Which at least gives you a sense of the layout of the papyrus, if you like. I mean, again, you can see these large blank areas, but we can be clear from what we can see and what is preserved that column 1 gives us the gods of ancient Egypt, and it was the tradition in writing histories and lists like this that beginning of Egyptian history began with lists of gods. So column 1 and column 2, and even into 3 is all gods and spirits and mythical kings. You then get dynasties 1 and 2 in column 3, dynasties 2 to 5 in column 4, and dynasties 6 to 8, 9 and 10 in column 5, and dynasties 11 to 12 in column 6. So if we look a little bit more closely at those, these are columns 5 and 6. The papyrus is read right to left, which is more normal for Egyptian papyri than the other way. Again, you can see these large blanks, but you might just about be able to make out at the right-hand end of each column the title Nesu Biti, which is composed of the sedge plant, and the B, that title we understand to mean King of Upper and Lower Egypt. And then you might, and of course this is not a facsimile drawing, this is a transcription, but still it shows what of the signs are preserved. And there's the first part of each line after the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt is a cartouche giving us the name of the king. You might, if you follow some of these lines that are a bit more complete, if you follow them along, you might be able to see some numbers as well. The numbering system involving single little lines, strokes we call them, for numbers up to 10. Then a kind of hoop, looks like a sort of croquet hoop, is 10, and so on. There are different signs for 100, 1,000, and so on. But of course, we don't get up that high for the length of reigns of kings. So this allows us to say a little bit more about this obscure period of the dynasties following the collapse of the Old Kingdom at the end of the 6th dynasty. This, by the way, this is again not a facsimile drawing. It's a schematic diagram. This is the way that the names are laid out in the Abydos king list. This is a drawing that's on the brilliant pharaoh.se website, which I've modified. The divisions are mine. So you can see that we can be fairly clear about which name is which, and that the sequence is very good. It lines up with our archaeological evidence, and the list is pretty comprehensive for dynasties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 actually. But we've then got a bit of a break, and for some reason we've got lots of names. That does match what Manetho tells us about dynasties 7 and particularly 8 is here. Not very much for 11, but we think probably that is because it's only the very end of the period, as we'll see, during which the kings of that line, Manetho's 11th dynasty, were recognized throughout the country. And a list like this, the Abydos king list, of course, would be based, as all such lists were, on temple archives. And I think we've probably discussed before the fact that when you get fragmentation in the country, the archaeological evidence might show us that from one place to the next, a different king is recognized here, a different king there, etc. But depending on where your archives are, it would be only one king that was recognized. So it would seem that this is probably based on a Memphite archive, and that during the period of Dynasty 8, even if we know now from all the totality of the evidence that Egypt was probably divided, the temple archive, the Memphis temple archive, was still working on the basis that this line of kings, this Memphite line of kings, Dynasty 8, was on the throne. I hope this is all making sense. This, by the way, is the Ramesses Abydos king list, and you can see something similar sort of going on. Not very much of it preserved relative to the Abydos list, but we've got the 12th dynasty down here. Nothing at all for the period in between the 12th dynasty, Middle Kingdom, and the 18th dynasty, New Kingdom. But then above, again, a long section that apparently relates to the 8th dynasty, a line of Memphite kings. So what happens after that, or around the same time even, perhaps, as that? Manetho's 9th and 10th dynasties begin to give us more of a sense of the essential character of this period. So Manetho tells us for the 9th dynasty that this consisted of 4 kings of Herakleopolis. This is important, of course. We have seen that all of the kings up to this point, 4th, probably in fact 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, all in Memphis. We're now in Herakleopolis. This is a site some 50 or 60 miles south of Memphis, not very far, but still a different place, who reigned for 100 years. The first of these, King Aktoes, behaving more cruelly than his predecessors, wrought woes for the people of all Egypt. But afterwards he was smitten with madness and was killed by a crocodile. Not sure that we can really read too much into the historical circumstances from that last bit, but this little section about him behaving more cruelly and the fact that he apparently wrought woes for the people of all Egypt is maybe of some significance. It at least hints that there was woe in the country, and whether a 9th dynasty king was responsible for this or not, it seems that it happened during this time. That name, by the way, Aktoes, is a name that you'll see elsewhere in the literature as Aktoi, and also elsewhere as Heti. And of course, the first of those is Manetho's form of the name. He was writing in Greek, and his names generally took a sort of a Greek and often quite corrupted form. It's for that reason that it's often difficult for us to establish exactly who Manetho means as regards the names we see in the archaeological evidence. But here the correspondence is reasonably clear, and actually, even though Aktoi and Heti might not seem too similar, actually the important parts are the consonantal parts, the ch and the t, which are the same in both cases. I just wanted to mention that there because if you're ever reading about this, and some of the things I've been reading and putting this presentation together, use one or the other of those names, Aktoi or Heti, without explaining that you might find both names in use. So just beware. It's one of those things that might trip you over and might even have been tripping me over for a little bit in preparing this. Moving on briefly, Manetho tells us that the 10th dynasty consisted of 19 kings, again of Herakleopolis, who ruled for 185 years. So we don't have much by way of names here. Again, just the name Aktoi or Keti for the 9th, and nothing for the 10th. But as you'll see, we can begin to flesh the story out a little bit. Let's look first, though, at Herakleopolis, because this is important. And in fact, these are the three major centers of power during this fragmented period of the country. So Memphis in the north, at the head of the delta, had been the capital during the Old Kingdom. It was the site of the royal cemetery of that period, of course. Giza, Abusir, Saqqara, Dashur are all within the Memphis zone. They were all cemeteries of Memphis, even though Saqqara is by far and away the closest to where the city actually was. The other two main centers of power, and in fact the more important centers of power as this period wears on, are Herakleopolis, which, as you can see, is not too far south of Memphis. It's about 50 miles, I think, something like that, 50, 60 miles, in the region of the Fayum, a little way upstream from the canal leading to or the channel leading to the Fayum. And then Thebes, which of course is the long way, hundreds of miles to the south, just to the south of that great kink in the river, which we sometimes refer to as the Cana Bend, because the modern city of Cana is more or less in the middle of it. So those are these three main centers. Herakleopolis itself is a place that Neil and Rosemary, hello, and I, maybe one or two others of you in the room, I'm not sure, visited just recently on this Missing Cities trip that we've just done. This was my first ever visit to Herakleopolis, but it's been in my mind to go for a long time. It's another place that you can't visit without a special permit, but we were lucky enough to have one. It was a very important place, not only a capital city during this period, the first intermediate period, the seat of the kings of the 9th and 10th dynasties. It was the seat of a king again, at least one, in the late third intermediate period, in the time running up to the Kushite conquest of the 25th dynasty. It was also the cult center of the god Herishef, and the site of a large temple there, probably a succession of temples. The one that survives, or two that survive, are from the 19th dynasty and the Ptolemaic, but reusing Middle Kingdom blocks. It was a substantial urban settlement and an important place for a very long time. It's in the vicinity of the modern village of Ihnazia el Medina, which was a village a century or so ago when people like Eduard Naville and Flinders Petrie came to do a little bit of digging at the site. That village has now grown and is more of a town these days. So actually, what was Ihnazia only a century ago is now Ihnazia el Medina, the city of El Medina. And what you're looking at here is the urban sprawl of that site, with a sort of muddy-looking splodge in the bottom left-hand corner, which is the protected archaeological area, not used either for agriculture or buildings. So this is that splodge. This is the site. It's a very large area. It's never been fully excavated, although it's been prospected, and the major monuments, temples, and tombs have been explored. The pins in the map here are at some of the most important points. A cemetery in the bottom left. There's a gateway of the third intermediate period just to the right of that in red. Along the left-hand side, the yellow and red pins just to the left of where it says Herakleopolis are around the area of the main temple of Herishef. The other side of the map, on the right-hand side, is some later buildings, including a Christian basilica, and at the top is the Ptolemaic temple. The name in ancient times, and again, so we generally refer to this place as Herakleopolis. That is, of course, a Greek name meaning the city of Heracles. But its earlier name was Hut Neni Nezut, or just Neni Nezut sometimes. And this eventually came to, that word morphed and became Hennes, to Herodotus, again a Greek speaker, perhaps hearing things through that sort of in that way. He thought of it as Anesis. The word again morphed by the time of the latest phase of the Egyptian language, Coptic. It had become Ehnaz or Hanas, and it's from that we get the modern Ehnasia. So actually, Herakleopolis is nothing to do with the earlier name, but the name of the modern town, Ehnasia, actually derives from this earlier Hut Neni Nezut. And as I mentioned, it's the cult center of Herishef, a ram-headed god whose name literally means the one who is upon his lake. This was the most important cult center of the worship of this god. I'm sorry, that's such a terrible photo. It's taken from the Herakleopolismagna.com website run by the Spanish archaeological mission that's been working there for a long time. Yeah, sorry, that's not a better photo. You just have to trust me. Human form, ram head, with a sun disk in this case. This is Flinders Petrie's plan superimposed, so you get an idea of the area. He didn't label them, and I'm not sure that he really explored this area of the site. But in between where it says Temple of Herishef, Roman wall, in between there is the area of the first intermediate period cemetery. So there's a number of elite tombs have been found in there, but no sign, as far as I'm aware, of any royal tomb, any tomb of any of these kings, which is a bit of a shame and a bit of a mystery. We don't exactly know where these kings of Manetho were buried still. As I mentioned, the temple, I can't resist putting this photo up because it was such a lovely thing to see, and I'm pleased with the photo. This is the bottom half of a seated colossal statue of Ramesses II, which has been re-erected on a modern plinth. I think that must be to protect it from groundwater. And it must have stood at the front of the Temple of Herishef, which is a little bit behind. That's a 19th dynasty monument, but again, it's a substantial temple and gives you an idea of the importance of the city in Ramesses' day. But no doubt it was an important place before and after that as well. And the same can be said of this Ptolemaic temple, which is up at the northern extent of the site, very much overgrown, as the whole of the site is, with vegetation now, which is also a bit of a shame. But of course, being a long way off the beaten track and not a site that offers many very spectacular monuments, it's a little bit neglected, despite the best efforts of the museum, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and the Spanish archaeological mission. So what else can we say about this period? Well, we think we know a little bit about one of the kings of the 10th dynasty line, and that is a king called Merikare. We know most of what we know about him, or at least his father perhaps, and his approximate time, from a well-known literary text called the Instruction or the Teaching for Merikare, which was obviously an important text for trainee scribes, because we have several copies of it. It's obviously a text that was being used for scribes to practice their writing. Unfortunately, even though there are 3 copies, each of them is fragmentary, and we still don't have a complete version of the text, even when combining the 3 of them. But they are Papyrus Leningrad, Papyrus Moscow 4658, and Papyrus Carlsberg 6, which is the one that's in the image here. They are all of approximately the period of the 18th dynasty. So from some time after the the people and events of the text, but maybe not so far afterwards. It is a literary text as well, with a specific function, a sort of didactic function. But we think that we can be reasonably confident that some of the people and events it describes may really have been genuine historical people and events. It's written apparently. Probably wasn't in reality, but it is written as if by an old king to his sort of successor, his heir, who is Merikare. The name of the king, the old king, who's talking all about his exploits and giving the teaching to his son, is missing. But the last part of that name is two reed leaf signs, which give us the sound value E, usually written with a Y in transcription. And that is, we think, probably because it's quite prevalent around this time, a part of the name Cheti again, or Achtoi elsewhere. And it's usually thought that this is probably the third of the king to have that name, Cheti, Nebkaura Cheti. We can be by no means sure about that, but that is but that's the closest thing there is to a consensus on which of the Ketis. In any case, so we've got a Keti and we've got a son and successor called Merikare. And here is some of the text. In the first part, it talks about, intriguingly enough, given what we've already seen, rebellion and how to overcome it. So the text says, the hothead, this is of course in translation from Miriam Lichtheim's Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 1. The hothead is an inciter of citizens. He creates factions among the young. If you find that citizens adhere to him, denounce him before the councillors, suppress him. He is a rebel. The talker is a troublemaker for the city. Curb the multitude, suppress its heat. So all of this in the context of what we already know. We've got a period when apparently the capital city is moving about, or the centres of power are changing. We've got this period of the around the 7th dynasty, 8th dynasty, when perhaps we've got a 9th dynasty, we've got lots and lots of kings. We have got that reference to a time of woe in the country. And then we've got references here to rebellion, and also mentions of the city rather than the country. Everything's a bit sort of city and region specific in this text and in other texts like it, again suggesting that the writers, the people whose sort of minds we're getting a window onto here, are thinking in regional terms rather than in terms of a united country. The second section relates to advice on dealing wisely and justly with nobles and commoners, which again may be something perhaps to do with the sort of idea of fragmentation of the country into regional units. If you're skilled in speech, you will win. The tongue is a king's sword. Speaking is stronger than all fighting. The skillful is not overcome. On the mat, the wise is a school to the nobles. Those who know that he knows will not attack him. No, a crime occurs when he is near. All useful advice. There's then what's described by Lichtheim as an historical section in which the old king, we'll call him Cheti, we'll assume that is his name, describes his accomplishments and advises the young king on how he should keep going in the same way. This includes this passage: raise your youths and the residents will love you. Increase your subjects with recruits. See, your city, another reference to a city, not to the whole of Egypt, is full of new growth. 20 years the youths indulge their wishes, then recruits go forth, veterans return to their children. Advance your officials, promote your soldiers, enrich the young men who follow you, provide with goods, endow with fields, reward them with herds. Do not prefer the well-born to the commoner. Choose a man on account of his skills. Nice sort of socialist principles there. Section goes on for quite a long time. I've just taken out what seem to me to be some of the most interesting passages here. But there's a mention early on in the text to some kind of raid or some kind of destructive event having happened at Abydos. And then it comes again, and this time, very strikingly, it comes with a note of regret on the part of Keti. And we take this to be some sort of a record, however vague, of a historical event. He says, "Lo, a shameful deed occurred in my time. The nome of This," This or Thinis, you might remember, was famously the capital, according to Manetho, of the first dynasty. It was the region of the 8th nome of Upper Egypt, the region of Abydos, which by this point was already, of course, an incredibly important place. "Though it happened through my doing," so This was ravaged, "though it happened through my doing, I learned it after it was done. There was retribution for what I had done." There's a kind of a very striking note of regret here. "For it is evil to destroy, useless to restore what one has damaged, to rebuild what one has demolished. Beware of it." He seems to be saying, don't go and trash Abydos like I did. So what else can we learn about Merikare? Well, curiously enough, he does seem actually to have had a pyramid, and we've got no trace of this archaeologically, or at least we don't. We haven't certainly got any trace of it archaeologically, or we'll see that we may have in just a sec. There's a stele on the left-hand side here, which was discovered by Quibel at Saqqara, published in one of his excavations at Saqqara volumes. It's a stele of a man called Anpu M. Hart, or Inpu M. Hart. Inpu or Anpu is the Egyptian form of the name the Greeks knew as Anubis. So that name just means Anubis is at the forefront. Anpu M. Hart, and it mentions 2 pyramids. They clearly are pyramids of Merikare. We assume the same Merikare as the king of the instruction for Merikare, and also Teti of the 6th dynasty. And the pyramid of Merikare is named as Waj Sut, fresh. Not sure that's the greatest way of translating it, but difficult to know. It means green or verdant or full of life or fertile or something like that. Fresh is perhaps not a too bad a way. Fresh are the places, Waj Sut places of Merikare. So the pyramid certainly existed. As you can see from the hieroglyphs here, it's absolutely got a pyramid determinative. So there's no question that that's what this was. Must have been his tomb, of course. The pyramid is in fact mentioned in 9 different inscriptions, 8 of which come from North Saqqara. The other is of unknown origin, but Saqqara would seem like a pretty good bet, wouldn't it? And they were all found in the tombs of priests of the 12th dynasty, the Middle Kingdom, so a little bit after the time of Merikare. And at least 4 of those priests concerned were responsible for the funerary cults of both Merikare and Teti. So it seems highly likely, doesn't it, that the pyramids of Merikare together and the pyramid of Teti is at Saqqara. So what are the chances that the pyramid of Merikare is there as well? That would at least explain why we haven't got any royal tomb for him at Herakleopolis so far anyway. So this is the pyramid of Teti. We're looking kind of southwest, in fact, across the Teti cemetery. You probably know that the pyramid is surrounded, as they all are, most of these places, by elite mastaba tombs. So that's the Teti pyramid over at the left. Along the horizon towards the right, there are actually 2 pyramids. The pyramid of Usakaf in the foreground, and behind that, you can probably see it a bit clearer, is the larger shape of the step pyramid. So the Teti pyramid, there's no question about the whereabouts of that. And right next door to it, in fact, is another pyramid, which is known as Lepsius 29. Lepsius made a very comprehensive list of the pyramids that he encountered during the Prussian expedition of the 1840s and numbered them. And where these pyramids have come to be lost, as some of them have been over the years, they are referred to in the literature by their Lepsius number. So this is Lepsius 29. sometimes referred to as the headless pyramid. I confess I'm not entirely clear why. Anyway, I think Lepsius 29 is probably better. It has been suggested that this could indeed be the pyramid of Merikare, but it's also been suggested that it could be the pyramid of Mentuhotep of the 5th dynasty. And in fact, the archaeology, although there were no inscriptions as far as I know to help us decide one way or another, ceramic material, I think, and the construction techniques of the pyramid have led people to believe that, in fact, it's more likely to be the pyramid of Mentuhotep. It had been lost, incidentally. You might remember that a pyramid was rediscovered in this area around the Teti pyramid a few years ago, and it was rediscovered by our friend Dr. Zay Hawass, and this is an article online from 2008 describing that discovery. And the remains of the pyramid, there's not really very much of it left, are behind Dr. Zay. That's his excavation square there. There you go. So it was these excavations, in fact, that led to the discovery of this little bits of archaeology that suggest it's more likely to be Mentuhotep. Seems to me there's still a possibility that it is the pyramid of Merikare, but well, the discussion goes on, I suppose. So, sorry, folks, but we're going to go back to Manetho. We are now into the 11th dynasty. And by the way, what we've just covered there is not absolutely everything we know about the 9th and 10th lines at Herakleopolis, but there isn't an awful lot more to know. So moving on, we are now in the 11th dynasty. Manetho tells us, in this case, the 11th dynasty consisted of 16 kings of Diospolis, which is the name that was then current for the city we know better as Thebes, modern Luxor, who reigned for 43 years. In succession to these, Amenemnes ruled for 16 years. Amenemnes is the Greek form of the name. Amenemhat the first being the first king of the 12th dynasty. So that all lines up with our archaeological evidence. And based on what we can say from the Karnak king list, which, as we'll see, is actually very useful for this period, more useful than the Abydos lists, we can reconstruct part of this line, or perhaps most of this line, as follows, or as is in the left-hand column here. So we've got several kings called Iniotef, or just Intef. Again, same name, just a different rendering here and there. And I'm sorry, I think we've got both in this presentation at various points. So Iniotef, 3 of those, and then 3 kings, Mentuhotep. And the names as they appear in the Karnak list provide us with some suggestion of 1 or 2 coronation names in addition to personal names. So Intef and Mentuhotep would be the personal names, or the nomen, or the throne name. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry, the personal name, the birth name. But the Nebhepet Ra and Senefakara names that appear towards the end of the list would seem to be the coronation names taken on by these kings at the point they were crowned. So we're getting a bit more info here. Again, just to remind ourselves, so according to Manetho, at least, dynasties 7 and 8 were based at Memphis. They are most probably a continuation of the Old Kingdom lines. Dynasties 9 and 10, whether they were a continuation and the capital moved, or whether they're an entirely different group altogether, is not clear. But 9 and 10 were based at Herakleopolis, and now we see the 11th being based at Thebes. So that's the basis of the split of the country as far as Manetho's information is concerned. So there are a number of autobiographical texts that we have for this period, most of which come from high officials, mostly from stele, from various different sites. And every so often they will provide us with little snippets of useful information, which all together have been put together over a very long period of time to help flesh out our understanding of what was happening. And some of the key themes are these. They are written by, as I'm quoting from Miriam Lichtheim here, persons of various ranks who have in common an intense loyalty to their home districts, their nomes, which they rule or in which they serve a ruler. So we've already seen that a little bit in the way that the instruction for Merikare is written, and it's again a feature of these autobiographical texts as well. They also exhibit a strong sense of independence and self-reliance on the part of the nomarchs who rule their districts in kingly fashion. So from one text to another, we get this kind of fealty, this loyalty to a regional ruler, but without any reference to a kind of a ruling king, a king ruling over the whole of the country. So it's, again, another manifestation of this idea of a kind of a regionality or a split in the country, if you like, a division in the country. Subordinates wish to be remembered for their vigorous and beneficial activities in the service of their nomes and towns. Again, so that's going to come across in quite a few of these inscriptions. Royal power, if mentioned at all, appears remote until the long reign of Intef II. Intef II being one of those Inyotef Intef kings we've already seen as a part of the 11th dynasty. So curiously enough, that reign, and he is the ruler immediately prior to Mentuhotep II, the hero of today's talk, it may be that is the point at which we begin to see a shift back towards a kind of centralizing and the rise of a new power. We're going to look at a few more of these autobiographical texts as we go along, and the first one here is probably the single best known source for the first intermediate period, and it is inscribed on the walls of the tomb of a man called Ankhtifi, which is the one thing that you can go and visit at the site of Moala, which is, what would it be, about half hour, 45 minutes, maybe a bit longer, depending on the traffic, south of Luxor. And in this stretch of the desert, there's not an enormous amount of cultivated ground, but the landscape's quite distinctive in that on the way to the high desert mountains, you get a number of these sort of little hills, and this one appears to have almost a sort of natural pyramid shape. And the tomb, as you can see, my group is heading towards the entrance here, is cut into the base of this little miniature sort of pyramid hill. The tomb itself is very, very distinctive. It is one of very few monumental tombs to have survived from the first intermediate period. And inside, large parts of it have been restored. This is a modern wooden roof, which gives you the sense of a rock cut enclosed place, but the original roof is gone. The pillars are rather irregularly cut, and they have some funny sort of shapes. I don't know a better way of describing it than that. But it all looks almost kind of un-Egyptian. You can tell from the decoration on the pillar that's at the right-hand side of the photograph here that it absolutely is Egyptian. It's just as though the very rigid conventions of symmetry and precise cutting of architectural shapes and things have been sort of slightly done away with briefly. And this matches what we see in art elsewhere, in Stele in particular, where figures are not as elegantly carved, and the layout of designs on Stele is a bit less rigid, a bit as though the rules have slightly gone out of the window. I wish I had some examples here now, but anyway, I'm sure you perhaps know what I have in mind. So this is the tomb anyway. Inside, it's painted for the most part, paint on plaster, but there are some rock cut inscriptions as well. Paintings actually, as first intermediate period art goes on, not bad at all. And they exhibit the same sorts of scenes as you might expect to see in elite tombs, either of the Old Kingdom or of the Middle Kingdom. So there's a scene of the tomb owner fishing here. There's some craft scenes going on, and that's one of these these sort of oddly rounded shaped pillars on the right hand side here with a rock inscription running around it. And here's your man himself, Ankhtifi, in actually a rather nice raised relief on the face of one of these pillars. Ankhtifi himself was I don't like these translations. I did my PhD on titles, and it's very difficult to know how to translate Iri part Hartiar, but prince and count is fairly common. Just means that he was a sort of high-ranking noble, member of the nobility, member of the elite, the royal seal bearer, the sole companion (brackets) of the king, elector priest, the general, chief of scouts, the chief of foreign regions, and most importantly of all, the great chief of the nomes of Edfu and Herakleopolis, which is the region that the tomb, of course, is to be found in immediately to the south of Luxor. His text includes some of the following passages. Horus brought me to the nome of Edfu for life, prosperity, health, to re-establish it, and I did it. For Horus wished it to be re-established because he brought me to re-establish it. I found the house of Hulu inundated like a marsh, abandoned by him who belonged to it, in the grip of a rebel, under the control of a wretch. I made a man embrace the slayer of his father, the slayer of his brother, so as to re-establish the nome of Edfu. So clearly a man of great deeds, if we're to take his account at his word. But again, some references here to a rebellion of some kind. Continuing in the same humble way, he says, I'm the vanguard of men and the rearguard of men, a leader of the land through active conduct, strong in speech, collected in thought, on the day of joining the three nomes. For I am a champion without peer, who spoke out when the people were silent, on the day of fear when Upper Egypt was silent. So if you can see past the bragging, again, there's some sort of hints here that there's been some unpleasant goings on in this part of the world. Unpleasant for Ankhtifi anyway. I then went down to the country to the west of Armant. This is a different part of the text. And I found that the forces of Thebes and Coptos had attacked the fortress of Armant. Armant is actually very close to Thebes, just a little way to the south. Perhaps only a few kilometers. I have 13 kilometers in mind. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but it's really very close. If you're ever on the West Bank and taking a local taxi, which is an experience I can recommend, it's good fun, you'll find that if the taxis, say from the ferry, are going to go south, maybe they don't even do this anymore, I don't know, but they used to. The taxis going that way would all be saying Armant, 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 because that's the direction you're heading in. So those little local taxis will take you to Armant if you ever want to try and go. And it was an important cult center of the god Montu. So not very far away from Thebes, and yet the Thebans, it seems, have attacked Armant. Then my courageous crack troops, Ankhtifi says, ventured to the west and the east of the Theban nome, looking for an open battle, like lads from the pub going and looking for a fight. No one dared to come out from Thebes because they were afraid of my troops. The whole of Upper Egypt died of hunger, and each individual had reached such a state of hunger that he ate his own children. This again is a different section from the text, I should say. It doesn't flow directly from the previous section. But I refused to see anyone die of hunger and gave to the north grain of Upper Egypt. And I do not think that anything like this has been done before by the provisional governors who came before me. I brought to life the provinces of Herakleopolis and Edfu, Elephantine, and Ombos. So, as with so many texts like this, it's a little bit difficult at first glance to discern exactly what's going on here. But clearly, we've got mentions of rebellion, as I said. We have got some sort of strife in Upper Egypt. We've got clear references now to Thebes having attacked Armant, and it's obvious that Ankhtifi is on the other side of the battle from the Thebans. He's opposed to the Thebans. There's also this reference here to giving to the north grain of Upper Egypt. And we understand from all of this that although you might want to see the countries having been split quite sort of nicely and straightforwardly between north and south, the north being controlled by Herakleopolis, the south by Thebes. It seems it was rather more complicated than that. So Ankhtifi is based to the south of Thebes, and he mentions the three gnomes here and there. And in this last passage, he talks about Herakleopolis, Edfu, Elephantine, and Ombos. Ombos is Komombo, incidentally. So that's the region that encompasses more or less everything to the south of Luxor. And if you throw in Armant as well, it really is everything to the south of Thebes. They all seem to have been opposed to the Thebans, and that reference to the north perhaps suggests that Ankhtifi and co are allied to the northerners, perhaps the Heracleopolitan kings. So we've got a complicated situation here, but clearly this all speaks to some even more clearly than any of the other sources we've looked at so far, to a kind of split in the country. So in summary, the text reveals kind of political fragmentation, the opposition of Thebes to Ankhtifi's region. And there's also this reference to economic hardship as well, and people going hungry. And it's not absolutely clear what connection there might have been between that and everything else, the rebellions and things. But possibly this economic decline is maybe what precipitated the end of the Old Kingdom and the collapse in central authority. We can't really know, but it's an interesting sort of added layer of information about maybe what the nature of this period was. So 11th dynasty, we've already seen this, consisted of 16 kings of Thebes reigning for 43 years in succession to these. Amenemhat of the 12th dynasty ruled for 16. This is, as I mentioned earlier, just briefly, this is where the Karnak king list, which is otherwise rather more sort of complicated and a little bit difficult to understand relative to the Abydos king list or the Manetho list. This is where the Karnak list comes into its own. This is just one part of it, but it's a part that seems to have some very useful coherence. And appears to be telling us something about the 11th dynasty. So this is Thutmose III at the left-hand end, who is acknowledging his ancestors, or perhaps raising his hand in a gesture of appreciation or whatever, if not actually worship. Along the bottom row here, we have a number of seated kings, 5 in all. The first of them at the left-hand end is unnamed, or the name is not preserved. Of the 4 others, 3 of them enclose their names in cartouches. The one at the very end, who I've highlighted here in green rather than in red, it has the appearance of all the others, is seated on a throne, but doesn't enclose his name in a cartouche, interestingly enough. So at the far end, we've got a chap called Intef. Again, that's the name Intef in Yotef elsewhere. Then working from right to left, the next chap along has the name Men something, text broken. And then we've got 2 more kings whose names are clearly Intef. The cartouches are nicely preserved. And we think, in fact, that this is a representation of the 11th dynasty family line in sequence. And that the kings here are Men something is Mentuhotep I, who, according to this, according to what this implies, would seem to be Intef I, and then another Intef II. The first of these isn't given an ordinal number because we believe he wasn't actually a king, and that would be why his name's not written in a cartouche. We think that he was the forerunner of this line of kings, but didn't claim kingship for himself. He was more likely a nomarch. So still the most important person in the Theban region. He just hadn't got confident enough to proclaim himself king at this point. This is the same kind of phenomenon that some of us are very familiar with from the Third Intermediate period, where you get individuals who are ruling a particular region of the country with titles of various kinds. They might be high-ranking priest, or they might be a chief of some kind, or a tribal chief, or just the foremost one of the town, something like that. And from time to time, individuals like this take on the trappings of kingship, including writing their names in a cartouche, depicting themselves in close communion with the gods, and perhaps even claiming a coronation name or a throne name, something like that. So in these periods when you get fragmentation in the country, it is a phenomenon that we see more than once in Egyptian history, where people decide, well, I'm going to be king. Why not? Why shouldn't I be the king? I'm as good as anybody else. And this is where we get this sudden proliferation of lines. And it looks like maybe this is exactly what's happening here. So the line starts out as an ordinary line of local rulers, and the ruler of a nome, the nomarch, and that perhaps under Mentuhotep I, they decide, sure, I think we can be kings. Why not? There's a relief from the Temple of Tod, which is another site not very far south of Luxor. I'm sorry I don't have Tod and Moala and these other places in the far south of Egypt on a map for you, but some of you perhaps will know where they are. Again, Tod and Moala, if you're visiting the region, are quite often lumped in together because they're quite close to each other. It's quite easy to do the two on the same day. There was clearly a Middle Kingdom late 11th dynasty monument at Tod, and this is a relief from that. Just a fragment of it, which shows three kings here, each of them raising up some kind of object in offering to a god, I should think, and their names are given above them, and in each case it's an intef. So it would seem from this that we have at least three kings intef, who are among the ancestors of the king who set this up, are Mentuhotep II. And in fact, this is how we would now reconstruct the family line. So I'm leaning heavily on Aidan Dodson and Diane Hilton's brilliant book, The Complete Royal Families of Ancient Egypt. Here, indispensable resource for the study of the history of ancient Egypt. And as you can see here, the names in capital letters and in bold are the names of the kings who were claiming kingship. So working backwards, if you like, from the bottom, Mentuhotep III was preceded by our hero Mentuhotep II, who was preceded by three kings, names rendered in Yotef here, but it's the same name as Intef. Intef the third, Intef the second, Intef the first, preceded by Mentuhotep, and above him another in Yotef or Intef, and that is our nomarch in Yotef, who's given the letter A here in Intef A. And we can add from various bits and pieces of evidence here and there, if not coronation names, praenomina, then at least some little epithets, which help strengthen the idea of these individuals as having been claiming the kingship, or, well, in the case of the first on the list here, titles that make it clear that they were not claiming the kingship. So the first in our list is the Iripart Hati R Intef, who was the nomarch. Iripart Hati R, those are the same titles that were translated in Ankhtifi's case as prince and count. The ones I say we struggle to translate, I think. But so in the first of the line, Intef actually didn't have different status in that sense from Ankhtifi of Moala. He's just a regional governor. Mentuhotep I, his successor, was given the title Tepi R, which we'll look at in a little while. From that point onwards, the kings seem to have had more conventional coronation names. Sekatawi Intef I, Wach Ankh Intef II, Nakht Nefer Intef III, Nebhepet Ra Mentuhotep II, Sankar Ra Mentuhotep III, and finally, in this list, at least for the purposes of this list, Nebtawi Ra Mentuhotep IV. So looking at those kings in turn, this is a stela which seems to mention our pre-royal Intef A, the prince and count, who we can probably identify with one of the known nomarchs of this name from this part of the world. So there are a number of Hati R Iri parts intefs attested on stele like this. We can't be absolutely sure which, if any of them, is the intef of the 11th dynasty, but it seems likely that that one of them is. Mentuhotep II, I mentioned, sometimes has this this epithet tepi R, which means the sort of first first and great, I think, something like that. Anyway, we take this to mean the ancestor, and it seems important. It seems to have been particularly important to Mentuhotep II, actually, to have made a record of his ancestors. So, hence the relief that we saw from Todd just now of the three intefs in a row, and there are a number of similar scenes and inscriptions like that one. Where Mentuhotep, in particular, seems to have been very keen in emphasizing the names of his predecessors and the fact that he was a part of this family line. And this, of course, you probably recognize from other places and other periods, is a classic device for legitimizing somebody who is perhaps worried about their legitimacy. So indeed, if this is a line that spontaneously decided to claim kingship at a certain point, then that would explain that paranoia, if you like, about whether or not people were thinking, well, you're not a real royal family. Great way to establish that you are, if you can show yourself to have had distinguished ancestors. It is sometimes thought by Egyptologists that Mentuhotep I, as he appears in the Karnak list and elsewhere, might not even really be a real figure, or might only be partly based on a real figure, and may in fact have been invented for the purposes of establishing the dynastic line. In any case, though, it seems likely that Mentuhotep I is indeed the men of the Karnak list. Sekhetawi Intef I is not known from any contemporary monuments, only from the Mentuhotep inscriptions from Todd. And this is another part, or another one of those inscriptions on the left-hand side here, which shows a serek, another standard way of enclosing the name of a king. And that name, Sekhetawi, you can probably see, is inside the serek beneath the figure of Horus wearing the double crown. It is sometimes thought that it could be Sekhetawi Intef I, who is mentioned in a graffito in the desert from the northwest of Luxor, a little way north and west. This mentions the assault troops of the son of Ra Intef, and it seems to relate to a conflict of some kind, perhaps between local rulers, perhaps between Thebes and Coptos, which was it's about an hour's drive to the north. Those of you who have been will know from Luxor, cult center of Min, at the end of trade routes running off into the eastern desert. And it seems Thebes and Coptos may have been opposed to one another at various points. And so perhaps he is the Intef of that inscription. We can't be sure. We also possibly know of his tomb, which was along with several tombs of the kings of this period in the El Tarif part of the Theban cemetery. We'll have a look at that in just a bit. So we've had a look at Mentuhotep I. According to Aidan and Diane, Intef I was the son of Mentuhotep I. Intef II, perhaps a brother of Mentuhotep. I think this idea that they're brothers is based on the fact that at a certain point Mentuhotep I is referred to as a father of gods, in a context that suggests that gods means kings. He was therefore the father of two kings. And as the author of that inscription, if I remember rightly, is Intef II, then the implication is that him and the other god, being Intef I, would be brothers. So that's how Aidan and Diane reconstruct things here. Intef II is succeeded by a son, another Intef III. sorry, so Intef the first and Intef the second brothers. Intef the second we know quite a lot more about. This is a funerary stela of his, which comes from his tomb, which again is in the El Tarif region of the Theban cemeteries. This is funerary stela, not unlike lots and lots of other examples from this approximate period. And this one is now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it was found indeed in that El Tarif area. We know as much as we do about Intef II, largely again from more of these autobiographical type inscriptions from elite officials of the period. This is a good example. This is a stela which is now in the British Museum, BMEA Egyptian Antiquity 614. From Thebes, and this includes a passage that says the Horus Wach Ankh, that would be Wach Ankh Intef II, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, and Intef is the first of this line we're aware of claiming that title, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, meaning king of the whole country, showing the direction of travel perhaps towards reunification. Son of Ra, Intef, born of Neferu, he who lives eternally like Ra. This land was under his rule southwards as far as Yebu, which is the region of Aswan, Elephantine, and reaching as far north as Abydos, which is interesting, of course, because if you recall from the time of Ankhtifi, the Thebans were having a go at Armant, but certainly not on the same side as Herakleopolis, Edfu, Komombo, and Elephantine. It would seem, if this is to be taken at face value, that by the time of Intef II, that part of the world and the Nile Valley downstream as far north as Abydos had all come under the control of the Thebans, so they are growing their territory. This is another of these. Stelae. Again, a very sort of characteristic first intermediate period Middle Kingdom slab stela type. This is of a man called Jari. This is now in Brussels. This stela, just a very very short reference here, but a part of the text reads: Intef fought the house of Kheti to the north of Thinis. Thinis again is the region of Abydos. So this is supposedly the frontier of Intef, according to the previous stela. But we're now told that Intef of the 11th dynasty was fighting the house of Kheti, and we know that Kheti is that name that crops up over and over again in the 10th dynasty. So this is the Heracleopolitan line. So even though it's a very, very brief mention, it's a clear reference to the conflict between the Thebans and the Heracleopolitans. Something else that is highly significant, we don't know a great deal about it, but this would seem to be a very big moment in Egyptian history. The earliest mention of the god Amun comes from the reign of Intef II, so I believe. Amun, of course, by the time of the New Kingdom, is the preeminent deity of the Egyptians. So if you think when Ramesses II is riding into battle against the Hittites at Kadesh, it is Amun who's with him, or Amun Ra. Amun Ra is the preeminent deity for the Egyptians from at the latest the time of the New Kingdom onwards. You'd think, wouldn't you, that he had been well established for many centuries by this point, but not so. It is only at this point in the 11th dynasty that he appears in our evidence for the first time. So Amun's rise to the top of the tree in the Egyptian pantheon was relatively rapid. The earliest monument we have, again, I believe, from Karnak, which of course is the now the greatest surviving temple from ancient Egypt, and certainly one of, if not the most important cult centers, again from the time of Amun's preeminence, New Kingdom onwards. The earliest monument we have from that site dates from the reign of Intef II. It's a column that is inscribed with his name, I think. So it would seem that this is the moment not only that the country is perhaps coming back together and the power of the Thebans is rapidly growing, but Amun is on the rise here as well. And of course, we know that that's going to be very, very significant for Egypt in the future. The autobiographical stela, and I feel as though I ought to confess here, I'm not absolutely certain that the stela that gives him a 50-year reign is the stela that we're looking at in the image here. I just didn't have a chance to check that absolutely thoroughly. But a stela, possibly this one we're looking at, possibly not, from the tomb credits him with a reign of 50 years. And you'll remember that Manetho and also the Turin list give us reign lengths, and that corresponds quite nicely with what we know from those other sources. We don't know so much about Intef III, but then if Intef II, his presumed predecessor and father, reigned for 50 years, then possibly son and successor Intef III was waiting around for quite a long time before the throne came to him, a bit like poor old King Charles in the UK in 2025. So possibly Intef III was already of a fairly advanced age by the time he came to the throne. Then that might explain why he, according to the Turin Canon at least, only reigned for 8 years. It might also explain why we don't know very much about him. He didn't have very long to do very much and didn't leave very much behind. But he also appears to have been buried in a tomb in El Tarif called the Saf el-Barka. I'm sorry I didn't say that this is in El Tarif, but all of these tombs, the Intef tombs, are all in that area. So there's that list again. We've got as far as Intef III. We are about to get to the point of Mentuhotep. Before we do that, this whole talk is meant to be about Mentuhotep, and I haven't got there yet. We're just going to quickly go to El Tarif. You might not be interested in this, but I really am. So we're going to take a bit of time on this. Tarif is in the area. I'm sorry this isn't labeled. I just didn't get enough time to put labels onto my map. But if you know the Theban necropolis, this is the road running along the front of Dra Abu el Naga. And this road, which shows up as being much darker up here, is the road that leads up to the Valley of the Kings. So if you're visiting the Valley of the Kings, given that you now are not allowed to walk there from any direction, you have to take the tarmac road. And this is the point that you start winding up into the mountains. So this area here, a little bit of green. The green are the trees around Carter's excavation house. So Valley of the Kings is up here, and this is Dra Abu el Naga. The rest of the Theban necropolis is would be off to the bottom left of the map here. El Tarif is roughly this area here, in between this irrigation canal along here and the modern road that's heading up to the village of Gabawi, which incidentally is where everybody was moved after they were removed from the houses that were in the around the area of the tombs of the nobles. Everybody went off to this place called Gabawi, which is up here. Anyway, so Tarif is in this area here, which, as you can see now, is built up, sadly. So I've done what I'm fond of doing, and I'm taken a plan. This is from Porter and Moss. So as you can see here, road leading up to the Valley of the Kings. This is Dra Abu el Naga here. This is the Gurna Temple of Seti I, if you know that, the mortuary temple of Seti I, and this is the Tarif area here. So Porter and Moss only really sketches in the approximate shapes of these tombs. This is one of them here. The tomb of Warq Ankh Intef II was approximately here, and this is the area of the tomb. Actually, I think Porter and Moss is a little out of date with the label here. This is the tomb of Intef III, I think. And just to show a couple of photos, these were taken in the, I guess it must be no later than the early 20th century, but I don't exactly know when. Published by Herbert Winlock in his article on on these tombs in the American Journal of Semitic Languages, number 32 from 1915. So this is looking towards the Theban hills across El Tarif, and this open area here is a sort of courtyard area of the tomb of Intef II, which is sometimes called the Saf el-Kisasiya. Saf, by the way, is the Arabic word for a row. So if you're ever in the Theban Acropolis and looking up in the hills and you see sort of a number of openings in the rock, the name Saf comes from this idea of those openings are actually the spaces in between engaged rock-cut square-based pillars with the tomb behind. So those rows of pillars are the rows that give their names to this type of tombs, Saf tombs. So all of these Intef tombs are as a lot of the monumental Middle Kingdom, First Intermediate Period Middle Kingdom tombs are, they're all tombs of this type, Saf tombs. This one is the Saf el-Kisasiya, which is not really visible in this photo, but there you go. This is the tomb of Intef III, Nebtep-nefer, sorry, which is in this area here, in between the A and the B labels in Winlock's photograph. You can see actually a few these are modern buildings here on the left-hand side. Obviously, those have proliferated over the years, and this area now is completely overbuilt. Again, I don't know when this photograph was taken. This was published in the fairly recent catalogue of the Middle Kingdom exhibition at New York from about 2015, Ancient Egypt Transformed. And this is the area of the Saf el-Bakar, the tomb of Intef III here. But again, this area completely built over, and this whole area, I think, now lost. So tragically, the Intef cemetery, I don't know if there's anything left of the tombs, but certainly it's more or less impossible, I believe, to visit them now. So at last, we reach the time of Mentuhotep II. And when it comes to uncovering his grand monument, we have first to go to another of the most famous episodes in the history of Egyptian archaeology. And this is the discovery of a tomb which is now universally referred to as the Bab el-Hossan, the tomb or the gate, the opening of the horse. And that is in the area of Deir el-Bahri. So this is sort of a bleak view looking down onto the Theban Acropolis. You perhaps can't really see any of these any monuments here, but what you will be able to see is the tarmac road leading up to the Temple of Hatshepsut. This is the car park there. So the Asasif part of the cemetery is here. This is the Khocha Hill. This is the Sheikh Abdel Gurna Hill. The Ramesseum is just poking out here, and this is the area of Deir el-Bahri here with the Hatshepsut temple there. And this is the area of concern for us from now on. This is Howard Carter writing in 1901 in an article in Annales du Service, the journal of the Antiquities Service. Some 2 years ago, I obtained the knowledge of the existence of this tomb when riding home after some rain had fallen, for on nearing the house, the ground gave way under the horse's legs, bringing both of us down. Afterwards, on looking into the small hole there formed, I saw traces of stonework, from which I concluded that there must be something, and most probably a tomb. I commenced excavating on the 20th of January 1900 in order to find out what really was there. That photograph on the right-hand side shows what he would eventually find at the end of a deep and very large cutting into the bedrock. As you can see from the his teammate there, who's standing, providing a bit of scale. Was a very large blocked entranceway. So this is where his horse had stumbled at that point. Carter was the chief inspector of antiquities for Upper Egypt at this point. So had a brief to be looking after the monuments, but also to do a little bit of digging here and there. So he would have been, as part of his inspection duties, all over the Theban Acropolis and indeed sites all over Upper Egypt. It was a heck of a large area he had to work in, but the Theban Acropolis was where he was based, and it was his primary place of work, of course. So he's right next to the tomb of Hatshepsut up here when his horse's foot revealed something. He went on. After working down some 17 meters, on the 10th of March, I found the door, which had its original mud brick ceilings intact. I made a small hole at the top of the door and entered, finding myself in a long arched passage having a downward incline of about 1 in 5. Inside the door, head of a calf and portions of a leg were lying on the floor. I descended the passage, which was quite clear and 150 meters long, ending in a large, lofty chamber, the roof again arched. In the left-hand corner of this chamber, lying on its side, was a seated statue about 2 meters high, completely wrapped in linen of a very fine quality. Beside it lay a long wooden coffin which was inscribed but bore no name. The style of the work showed that the tomb was of the early Theban Empire. That's a sort of arcane way of referring to the 11th dynasty, essentially, one of Manetho's Theban lines, the earliest of which, of course, is the 11th dynasty. No photographs of this, but this is, I think, Carter's own drawing of this scene that he encountered with the long wooden coffin and lying on its side, this statue wrapped in fine linen, which turned out to contain this very famous statue of Hepet Ra Mentuhotep II, shown with entirely black skin, not we think a real representation of what he really looked like. The black coloration is meant to evoke the blackness of fertile soil and its life-giving properties. So it's meant to evoke the idea of the king being full of life, if you like, which is appropriate because in fact this is a funerary statue. This, of course, being a tomb. He's wearing the red crown, of course, here. It's a very famous image. It was, when I took this photograph, still in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. As with all these things now, I have to say that it was there. I'm not absolutely sure if it's still there or whether it's gone to the gem now or what's happened. There are, incidentally, a number of these statues, but this is the best preserved and the best known, of course. So this is where it comes from. Carter continued and eventually found a doorway 30 meters down into a shaft, and the doorway was sealed with slabs of limestone. So Carter had high hopes, given that the ceilings had been intact and he'd found this carefully wrapped statue, etc., that he was going to find an intact tomb, and he was going to be hoping that this was the intact tomb of a king. So he opened it on the 1st of January 1901, and with great ceremony, inviting not only Gaston Maspero, the head of the Antiquity Service, but Viscount Cromer, the British Consul General, to be there. But unfortunately, this chamber was found to be quite small and contained only what Carter described as rubbish, rough wooden boats and pots. They did, on going back up to the chamber coffin in, find another shaft, but it turned out this only went down 2 meters and contained nothing but a wooden box, and the wooden box bore an inscription which led Carter to conclude that this had been the tomb of Mentuhotep I. But in fact, we now know Carter couldn't have done, that this was part of a much larger monument, in fact, that was very nearby, although Carter would have had no inkling of it at the time. And this is where we are going to go for the last part of the lecture. So we're at Deir el-Bahri. The Bab el-Hossan would be sort of just off to the left of this photo, sort of bottom left-hand corner, if we could kind of pan round, as it were. This isn't maybe the best known view of it, but I'm sure that you will recognize in the foreground here, just beyond my my colleague in the Galabeah, the Temple of Hatshepsut, with its very distinctive sequence, pardon me, of ramps and platforms set up against the dramatic cliffs of Deir el-Bahri behind. So this is where we are, and this is what we think of. I think most of us, when we think about Deir el-Bahri, we think about the Temple of Hatshepsut, and Deir el-Bahri is really synonymous with Hatshepsut, but there is a lot more to the place than just that 18th dynasty pharaoh. At the very start, that this is a very favourite part of the and has been since I was working not very far away, again off sort of to the left. If we were to pan round to the left, the camera would look out across the Asasif, which is a part of the Theban cemeteries. That's where I was working, and I would be looking over in this direction. And one of the thoughts that really struck me and has stayed with me ever since is just how extensively the Temple of Hatshepsut has been restored now. So we can be confident that what we're looking at here is an image of the temple as it would have looked according to the ancients designed, probably to Senenmut's design in the 18th dynasty. But it is certainly not what we're looking at here entirely ancient. What we're looking at now is the temple having been cleared, but also quite extensively rebuilt. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think that doesn't always perhaps come across for everybody who visits. So it's worth reminding ourselves that this is what the site looked like, albeit from a different direction. At the time, Edouard Naville was working here in the 1890s. I'm sorry, a bit of this caption is missing here. One of the just gorgeous photographs taken during this very early Egypt Exploration Society, or Egypt Exploration Fund as it was then, project. The fund had taken the concession to work at the Temple of Hatshepsut, and to fully clear it for the first time. The temple was very well known by this point. It had already been excavated by Auguste Mariette and others. It had been visited by lots of people. It was, very, very well known. But this was the first point at which it was comprehensively cleared. Between 1892 and 1899, we're looking at it here at the very beginning of that work. And as you can see, the temple itself is more or less completely invisible. It's buried beneath layers of debris. The largest and most visible standing structure there is actually that mud brick tower, which is part of the Coptic monastery that was built at the site and into and on top of the Temple of Hatshepsut. Incidentally, the Arabic word, you probably all know this story, the Arabic word for monastery is Deir. And so it is this Deir, the monastery, that gives its name to this area, the Deir el-Bahri meaning of the north. So this is the northern monastery, the one that is to the south being the monastery of the city, the Deir el-Medina, which of course gives its name to the village of the workmen. Anyway, another bit of linguistic history for you there. And that Coptic monastery, which was still standing at the start of the EES work, was removed by the EEF. So that they could get at the 18th dynasty temple below, which was, after all, the brief. But it does seem a shame, with hindsight, that a nearly 2,000-year-old monastery was removed at the process. Anyway, we wouldn't do that kind of thing now, but it just goes to show how much the area has changed in recent times. So Edouard Naville, it was, who was the director of this project. He was a Swiss Egyptologist, a specialist, mostly, as all good Egyptologists were, in Egyptian text, in particular funerary text, the Book of the Dead, and so on and so forth. Not really a digger, but then hardly anybody really was a digger in those days. It wasn't really until people like Petrie and Reisner came along that a kind of scientific archaeological method was developed. And so Naville was as good a candidate as any when the Egypt Exploration Fund was first formed to be the first explorer. Certainly, I think they dodged a bullet in not recruiting Heinrich Schliemann, who's most famous for the excavations of Hisarlik in Anatolia, which would turn out, we think, to be the remains of ancient Troy. He was a bit more gung-ho than we might like these days, might like our archaeologists to be. But the EES tried to get Schliemann. Anyway, they couldn't, and so they second choice was Naville, who, and he and Petrie would jointly, for the first 20-25 years of the EES's existence, the two explorers, explorer being the word given to these people who we'd now refer to as archaeologists. Naville was, having undertaken the work of clearing the Hatshepsut temple very intrigued by the discovery in 1896 of an 11th dynasty burial in the area. He also would have known that in this same part of the world, in the middle of the 19th century, an amount of material, some temple blocks and so on and so forth, been uncovered in the area. So he was curious to know what else there might be here, and speculated that there might have been more tombs, or even, as it says here, a cultic monument of some kind of temple or some such. So having completed the work of clearing the 18th dynasty temple, the Hatshepsut temple, he began to extend his north. Beneath the little shrine of Hathor that's at the southern end of the middle terrace of the Hatshepsut temple. So sorry, this is a bit text heavy here. We'll have a look at an image in a second. So he's, imagine if you go into the Hatshepsut temple, you go up one ramp, and then you go up another ramp, and then you go over to the left. You would be looking down the side of the temple. The Hathor chapel is at the or you'd be looking down into it, and so he's sort of working on the ground right in front of you as you sort of look down from that Hathor chapel area. And he immediately came across a kind of court next to the Hatshepsut temple, and then another wall facing the Hatshepsut temple 60 feet away, directly opposite, a little bit as though there was something immediately next door, previously unsuspected. So again, I'm sort of giving the game away here. In the yellow, this is the Hatshepsut temple. So we go up a ramp here. So we're on the second of the three terraces. Let's not in this case go up the second ramp. Let's just go over to the left here to the Hathor chapel itself. We can explore that a little bit, and then we can go right to the edge here and look down. And the court, the black is the Mentuhotep temple, and that court is sort of here, and the cliffs, of course, are behind. So the court is a sort of area that's bonded on one side by the cliffs, on this side by the Hatshepsut temple, and on this side by this new wall that has just started to emerge. And this wall, intriguingly, was of an entirely different character to anything else in the area that they had encountered up to this point. The stone blocks are much larger, interestingly enough, than the Hatshepsut temple blocks, and much more finely joined. The closest parallels known in Egypt at this time were blocks of the Middle Kingdom at Dashur, and Naviel was by now convinced that he had found a temple of the 11th dynasty. You might remember from my talk, for example, on the Fayum labyrinth, the mortuary temple of Mentuhotep III, that a lot of monuments of the Middle Kingdom, admittedly slightly later, 12th dynasty, are made in places of these very bright, fine, white limestone blocks, very beautifully cut and dressed, and then amazingly closely fitted together. You couldn't get a piece of paper in between the blocks. Absolutely no way. You can barely even see or even feel the joins. And so he was looking at very, very large blocks, very beautifully joined together in exactly this way. And this is what he would eventually reconstruct. So again, this is the Hatshepsut temple on the right-hand side here. This drawing was made at the end of Naviel's excavations, but before, in the 1960s. If we just go back a sec, that green temple is the temple of Tutmosis III. That wasn't discovered till the 60s. So when Naviel made this drawing, that was still underneath all the debris in here. So Naviel is sort of starting here and comes across this wall here, which is the very edge of the Mentuhotep temple. We're now looking kind of north across the two temples, with the Hatshepsut temple in the background and the cliffs to our left. And so this in front of us is the remains of what is the Mentuhotep temple. Again, back to that idea that the Hatshepsut temple has been extremely well restored. The Mentuhotep temple, by comparison, has not at all really been restored. So it looks less spectacular in some ways, but it doesn't take much imagination, I think, to see that this would have been every bit as spectacular a monument, and very, very similar in design. So where previously Naville and everybody else would have been thinking that the design of the Hatshepsut temple comes out of nowhere, it's a work of somebody's genius, perhaps Senenmut's, the discovery of the Nebhebet-Ra temple, Mentuhotep Nebhebet-Ra temple, shows that actually Hatshepsut's design is absolutely inspired by this earlier one. So you've got a ramp here leading to a squared platform here. There are a number, I think you can probably see, of depressions here, sort of grid of depressions. These are tree pits, so there would have been some kind of a garden in front of this platform here with trees. As the excavations proceeded in this direction, Naville and co came across a colonnade, and in fact proved to be surrounding a rubble mass in the center here, which is partially preserved, which Naville hypothesized was the remains of a pyramid or something like it. We can't be sure whether it was intended to be that or kind of primeval mound or something like that. But anyway, it's a very unusual feature, not present in the Hatshepsut temple, of course. Behind that, there's then what's referred to as a peristyle court, another columned hall, and then a kind of cutting that creates a squared area in the lower parts of the cliffs here, leading to the cliffs themselves, where there's an entranceway leading into what was probably the tomb, as we'll see. So these are a few photographs that were published in Naville's report. He gave over 6 volumes, excuse me, to the publication of the Hatshepsut temple, but only 1, I think, to the 11th Dynasty temple. But he did publish a number of photographs of the archaeological situation. This is the peristyle court here, so you can see a number of still standing octagonal and other shaped columns with the cliffs up at the back. You don't area, but you can perhaps see just here the arched entranceway leading off into the cliffs. This is an area towards the back of that peristyle court area, where, as it says here, Naville suggested this was a hall of the altar. Naturally, at the back of a temple like this, we'd be getting the sort of most sacred places, a place where rituals of various kinds would have been performed. This is an area, well, as in fact the whole temple was, where some extremely finely executed relief decorated blocks were discovered, albeit only in fragments. I don't really have time to dwell on this very much at all, but there is a project underway at the moment. It's a PhD project being undertaken by a friend and colleague of mine, Martin Pratt, at Johns Hopkins University in the States. And if you can believe it, his is his project is the first to try to virtually reassemble all of the decorated fragments from this temple. A number of them were discovered, as we've already seen, during the middle of the 19th century, actually by a guy called Lord Dufferin, one of these sort of aristocratic explorers who went grubbing around looking for antiquities, uncovered some blocks without realizing that they had come from this enormous temple that was still concealed at this point. So a number of blocks left at that point. Some of those, I think, made their way to the British Museum. The vast majority, though, of the blocks that were recovered during the Egypt Exploration Society work. A lot of those were removed, and a lot of them were distributed as a part of the division and distribution of antiquities that was common at this time among institutions like the EES. And so they went around the world. A number of them are in the British Museum, including this very fine block showing the king here, or it's 2 blocks showing the king, but they are absolutely everywhere, and they were never properly documented at the time. So Martin Pratt's project now is to try and virtually reconstruct all of these reliefs, and I wish him luck, because it's an absolutely splendid set of reliefs, and if they could all be reconstituted, then we'd be looking at a very, very spectacular monument, albeit virtually. As I mentioned, at the back of the peristyle court, we have an opening and a cutting into the cliffs, which originally presented as a kind of blocked entranceway, which you can see on the left-hand side here. But then once that was cleared, it proved to be a rock-cut tunnel lined with these arched pieces, reminiscent of the arched, example, in the ceiling of the burial chamber in the pyramid of Senusret II at Lahoun springs to mind. And this passageway eventually led to a chamber, a fairly simple chamber, dressed with granite blocks, I think, but which was found to be almost empty, and certainly not preserving anything that made it clear that it had been used for the burial. Naville, as a result, was skeptical about whether this was actually the tomb, but as far as I'm aware, no other tomb has ever presented itself as the final resting place of Mentuhotep. And in the absence of any better evidence, it seems to me highly likely that this was the place he was buried. It's just that it's been rifled, or perhaps for some reason it was never used. But we certainly don't have a better candidate for his tomb yet, and so this would seem to be the most likely place. Naville did publish drawings of a number of the reliefs. This is in fact the same couple of blocks that eventually made their way to the British Museum. A number of the finest blocks came from a curious part of the temple design, set around the back of the what's labelled here pyramid base. It's that mass of rubble. Could be a pyramid, could be a primeval mound. Around the back of that, sort of built in and around the colonnaded part, just before you get to the peristyle court, there are 6 shrines dedicated to female members of the royal family: Meet, Ashait, Sadeh, Kayuit, Kemsit, and Henhenit, each of which was very finely decorated with reliefs, again not terribly well preserved, only in sort of shattered fragments. But you can see from these lovely coloured drawings, many of them done by Edouard Naville's wife Marguerite Naville, who doesn't get the credit for the very good work that she did at the time. But as you can see, very, very fine blocks, and again able to reconstruct more of this. And there are many decorated fragments, by the way, still in situ at the site, as Martin has discovered from a couple of visits recently. So I'm hoping that it will be possible for perhaps some the gaps to be restored in some of these drawings. I'm sorry, we are, as ever, running short of. So eventually, Naville revealed an extremely large and spectacular monument. I was just reflecting on this with Martin not long ago, actually. It strikes me that there is no comparable monument to this anywhere in Egypt. The closest comparison, of course, is the Temple of Hatshepsut, which we all generally think of as being unique. They are both absolutely spectacular monuments, not only in their design, but in the way the design is set into the natural landscape of the Deir el-Bahri cliffs. They're not the same as one another either. They do exhibit some of the same distinctive features, particularly the ramp and the platform. But otherwise, they're quite different. The Mentuhotep temple having this colonnaded area surrounding this, whatever it is, pyramid or something, with the peristyle court beyond, And you see in this plan a little better the way that the natural shape of the cliffs behind the temple was cut into at the back to create this rectangular leveled area for a continuation of the temple, and then eventually the entranceway into this passage that I think in all likelihood does take us to what was intended to be the tomb. So it's an extraordinary monument that's been absolutely neglected by comparison with the Temple of Hatshepsut. And there's a wider significance to this as well. It's not just that this is a lovely, big, spectacular temple, but it's the beginning of the story of the reunification of the country at the end of the First Intermediate Period and the establishment. You'd never know it from visiting the sort. You can go and see tombs and temples. You can go and see in Luxor on the west side in particular. But there are a lot of Middle Kingdom tombs in that area. That the royal tombs of the 11th dynasty, the El Tarif tombs, now are certainly inaccessible, possibly completely lost to us now. But there are a number of other decorated tombs which would be suitable, I think, for visiting. And there's a really great story of the Middle Kingdom in Thebes to be told. And for me, the obvious starting point for that would be the Temple of Mentuhotep II, if it were given more attention one way or another. So this is just the last few images. This is how Naville reconstructed the temple. So actually, on the right-hand side here of the slide, you perhaps get as good a sense as you do from anywhere else of that that space that Naville encountered here. So this is the Temple of Hatshepsut, right at just the edge, the southern edge of the Temple of Hatshepsut. So he's working in this direction. He encountered this little courtyard and then came down on this massive wall here. That's the first point at which he realizes, oh, hello, there's something beyond this. And as you can see here in this reconstruction drawing, Naville was convinced that there was a pyramid in the center here. We don't know that, but it's a nice idea, and it might be right. Just one of the last things I want to say is that it wasn't until the Metropolitan Museum excavations under Herbert Winlock, a decade or two later, in the again in the Temple of Hatshepsut, in the temple area of the Temple of Mentuhotep, and then further sort of east into the valley. That they realized that actually the original layout of the temple of Mentuhotep extended underneath where the temple of Hatshepsut now lies. So in fact, the temple of Hatshepsut built over at least a part of the temple area of Mentuhotep. And it also, in fact, swallowed up a temple of Amenhotep I, which was in the area of the first of the Hatshepsut ramps. So the Winlock excavations did a lot to improve our understanding of this area. And of course, it was in the 1960s the Polish excavations completed the picture by discovering this Temple of Tutmosis the third up here. But so when we think of Deir el-Bahri, we tend to always think of the Temple of Hatshepsut. But actually, as you can see very well from this plan, the Temple of Mentuhotep is every bit as big. It would have been every bit as spectacular. And it's only the way that things have been managed in the last century or so that skews our attention away from the Middle Kingdom towards the 18th dynasty. On that note, I will stop having overrun as usual. And just say thank you very much. So thanks for listening. Hope that was all right. I gave a couple of lectures at the weekend on the missing cities themes, which we've already covered here, and it all seemed a bit incoherent to me. And I said that, but I also said that I hope that there was enough sort of, even if it was all a bit incoherent, enough nuggets of information to keep everybody interested. And what was I thinking earlier? Enough little sort of breadcrumbs for you to follow up. Yeah, even if we didn't cover everything I meant to today, I hope there'll be a few synapses firing and things to have grabbed your attention. So I'm going to go back through the chat and just see if there are any questions. I'm sorry if you have posted anything like that during the talk. I'm absolutely terrible for multitasking and doing a talk and also looking over at the chat. So I tend to just let it sort of go. So a few more hellos. I notice. Oh, hello, Kate. There's certainly somebody else who's with us on the Missing Cities trip. Nice to see you again, Kate. Yeah, Amy says, yeah, I've always wondered if the changes in Manetho were due to family bloodlines. Yeah, we just don't know, Amy. It's odd. If that were the case, then why not a change after Tutankhamun's reign? Why not have Horemheb in a new line? We don't know. And there are other instances as well where the reason isn't clear. Arthur says, Ankhtifi, such a modest chap. Yes, yes. Yes, you obviously know the text well. Hello in Seattle, Deborah. Hi, good to have you with us late or whenever, doesn't matter. Amy says the goat. I wonder what that would have been a reference to. Sorry, Amy, I'm not sure now. Mentuhotep Permian Extension says Mentuhotep II. No backstory deserves a whole lecture. Yes, I think you're probably right. Perhaps I'll put that on the list for the very long list of other things to cover. Matthew says, are there any publications yet from the PhD reconstructing the Mentuhotep reliefs? Good question. Thanks, Matthew, and hello. Yes, not a huge amount, but Martin has an academia page. He is Martin. I'll pop it into the chat. Martin with 2 A's. Pratt. He's been a Robert Anderson Trust beneficiary, which is how I came across his work for the first time. I think his work is excellent, and the project, as I say, I don't think I'm not sure there's a more important site or monument in the country, given how spectacular and important it was and how poorly understood it still is. I think the opportunity to do something good is really strong. So I've got high hopes for Martin's work. Not that I want to put him under any pressure, but he's already doing great stuff. So yeah, if you have a look at his academia page, you'll find a couple of things on there. Oh, Joe says, I seem to have lost you. I just was dimly aware at one point, folks, of a little note that just flashed up briefly that said my internet connection was unstable. So if you did lose me for a second, I'm sorry. That's another technical issue at my end. Some very kind remarks. Thank you, Arthur and Zoe, and Phil. Thank you. Joe says, will I sign off with my Egyptian farewell like in the podcasts? Yeah, I'll sign. I don't know if I should or not. Our sign off is life, prosperity, health, which I'm not even really sure is. I shouldn't say this, should I? I'm not even sure it's such a great sign off, but Izzy was determined that we should have one. That was the best I could think of. Yeah, thank you, more of you for kind comments. Thank you, Kate and Joyce. Good to see you here, Joyce. And Renee, thank you. Amelia, also thank you. Oh, Amy, the goat, greatest of all time. When you, oh yes, yeah, of course, yeah. So Mentuhotep I. Yes, possibly a fictional character. Makes a nice change from people claiming themselves to be the greatest of all, like boastful old Ankhtifi. Phil says, what was the structure that crossed the trees diagonally in front of the Mentuhotep temple? Let me go back. I think, Phil, that is the Bab el Hossan, actually. And in fact, I should have and didn't put that in. So what I was trying to do in arranging the story in the way that I did was to say, Bab el-Hassan is quite famous in archaeology. The statue of Mentuhotep the second is rightly famous. It's a very iconic statue, and it was discovered in the Bab el-Hassan by Howard Carter. The story of the name Bab el-Hassan is quite nice. And I think it's interesting to think that Carter was wrong in his conclusions about what the Bab el-Hassan was. Had he known that there was a whacking great temple of Mentuhotep just behind where he was working, he may well have interpreted his site differently. But yeah, so the opening to the tomb is just in front of the temple of Mentuhotep, and I think we're referring to the diagonal line is the line of the passageway of the Bab. I think that's what it is, but the entrance isn't on the plan, is it? But I think that's what it is. Yeah. Matthew says thanks. Yeah, I'm glad I popped that into the chat. Yeah, I'm not even sure that I'm saying Martin's last name completely right, but anyway, I'm sure that's how it's spelled. Thanks for your thanks, everyone. Actually, having moved the time, I had to move the time because I couldn't do the talk now. Again, if the revision of the time of today's lecture from 6 to 4 has tripped anybody over, I'm very sorry about that. I'm sorry it was a last minute change. I really don't like doing this. You might not think so from the number of times I've done it recently, but I just had no choice. My schedule having dictated. So I have got to head off. If you have any further questions, if anything more occurs to you, you can always pop it into the comments on the talk afterwards. And so, yeah, just to say thank you again. Thanks for coming. Thanks all of you Lapis members for supporting the channel and supporting me in my work. I really appreciate it. I've absolutely noted the suggestion that maybe we should have a Mentuhotep only talk at some point in the future. So the trouble with these things, I start off thinking, well, I'll do that and I'll do that and I'll do that, and there's never enough time to cover everything. But it just makes for more fertile ground for talks in the future, I suppose. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks again, everyone, and I will see you for the Tomb of Tutmosis II found next month, 23rd, isn't it? I think, but again, revised time. I think it's 23rd at 4. I think, is that what I was saying? Anyway, thank you all, and see you again. See you next time. Thanks, folks. Bye.